to compliment him on a career of distinguished public service, and to tell him that he knew that his decision to resign had been very difficult, but that he was confident that he had arrived at the right decision for himself and for Idaho, for the people of Idaho. And I think Senator Craig is going to conclude that that remains the right decision.
That would be your hope?
I think Senator Craig is going to conclude that, and I think that's the right place for it to be.
Mr. Bolton, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Margaret Warner in Pakistan. Tonight, she reports on changes in the country's civil society.
It's taken nearly 2 decades, but Pakistan finally has a National Gallery of Art. At a gala reception 10 days ago, Islamabad high society mingled with the artists and lauded the man who brought it about, architect Naeem Pasha. He designed this striking brick building to showcase some of the country's finest artists and some edgy artwork that does not always fit a strict Islamic sensibility. Pasha says it's about time.
In the last 30-40 years, we have been self-censoring ourselves, especially in art and culture and literature, that, what would be palatable and what would not be the palatable with the, the people at power or general public.
Pasha said the gallery's construction was due to the personal intervention of a very powerful benefactor, President Pervez Musharraf. Pakistan's military ruler opened the museum himself. He told the story of driving past the abandoned half-built site, asking what it was, and once Pasha was summoned to explain it, ordering it funded and built.
It has taken 60 long years to create this one art gallery. Well, they say it's better late than never.
The irony that it took a military ruler, not a civilian one, to finish this gallery wasn't lost on the artists and celebrities at the gathering. Pakistani supermodel Natasha Hussain covered the event for one of Pakistan's new private TV channels.
I was really happily surprised, and I've been feeling very emotional about this whole building, and that it's been made and that it's been done, and that our President General Pervez Musharraf has not only financially but otherwise also really helped all of us out, by doing this.
On hand was a throng of journalists from the country's newly robust electronic media, competing for Pakistani viewers with edgy offerings of their own.
I think we went haywire in the beginning ourselves, the media, because it was almost as if we'd been given a license to say whatever we liked. And so a lot of taboo subjects that were pushed under the rug suddenly started to surface.
Imran Aslam is the president of Jio Television, one of the most successful private networks in the country. Based in Karachi, Jio just celebrated its 5th anniversary. It operates 5 channels in Urdu and will launch an English-language one soon. It's all part of a media landscape that didn't exist before General Musharraf seized power in a coup 8 years ago.
We would give him his due. We've had a sustained period of, freedom, if you like, sustained in such a way that, in my experience, I've never seen that. But we have an expression over here. We say that, there is a lot of freedom of expression in Pakistan at the moment. Very little freedom after expression. And this is a problem.
It's a problem that Jio has directly experienced. When President Musharraf suspended Pakistan's Chief Justice in March, massive demonstrations erupted, covered live by Jio and other networks. As the cameras were rolling on a demonstration in Islamabad, police broke into Jio's bureau. The Jio cameraman filmed the attack, and the network broadcast it live as police smashed offices and equipment and beat up Jio journalists.
Immediately after the attack, within about 10 minutes or so, the president was on the line, and he went on live, spoke to the anchor, spoke to Hamid Mir, who had been attacked, who was our bureau chief in Islamabad, and apologized.
But what does it tell you that these cops bust in and beat up your reporters? Then the president apologizes. I mean, who's in charge?
We've been saying this. They keep saying, everything is under control, and our question has often been, under whose control? So I think there's always that problem. The investigation always leads to, some police personnel who decided to take the law into their own hands, and the matter rests there.
The vigorous press in Pakistan, where the newspapers offer unrestrained criticism of military rule, is often cited by the government as evidence that President Musharraf has delivered the enlightened moderation he espouses. Tariq Azim Khan is Pakistan's State Minister of Information.
There is this argument about whether a person holding presidency should also be in uniform. That argument, of course, is a valid argument, a strong argument. But on the other hand, we have to see the realities on the ground. Our experience has shown that a man in uniform, paradoxically, has given more democracy to this country than people in the cities. And that's the reality.
But critics of President Musharraf take issue with that, saying the TV technology genie was already out of the bottle. And they say a deplorable human rights record trumps any advances that he's made on the road to an open society. Pakistani activists describe rampant arbitrary detention, torture, and death in custody, and say they fight a daily battle to protect the rights of the individual. Attorney Asma Jahangir chairs the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan.
President Musharraf has called himself an enlightened moderate who's going to lead the nation. But at the same time, violence has increased. People are kept under illegal detention all the time. Torture is just routine. I mean, if you're not tortured, you're really lucky and exceptional. I don't know how, under what vocabulary, can a person who oppresses others and takes away their rights can ever be called a liberal or someone who is moderate.
From her office in Karachi, stacked to the ceiling with dusty legal files, Jahangir is leading a human rights revolution in Pakistan. The day we visited, a group of young volunteers, all women, were being trained to serve as community case investigators. Jahangir represents women and girls who've been raped and abused, families who've had their assets stolen by the government, and relatives of the disappeared. Jahangir says the majority of the disappeared are nationalists from the Baluchistan province in the southwest, suspected Islamic militants and terrorists, and the occasional journalists.
There are hundreds of people who have disappeared. And we have gone to court with a list of something like 175 people who still remain disappeared, out of which some were recovered and 95 are still not there. But to my utter amazement, that the government has been saying for a long time that these people are not with us. And then suddenly they own up to them. Suddenly they are released.
Yesterday, the Supreme Court ordered some 40 missing persons released by September 21. The government insists its record isn't as bad as activists claim. Sheikh Rashid Ahmed, a federal minister in the Musharraf government, says Pakistan's role in fighting the U.S.-led war on terror requires authorities to do what it takes.
There are some cases of tortures for investigations, to know the news and to know the network, to enter in the network.
And you think that's necessary?
In my opinion, yes, for such kind of people and things, you have to do something like this.
Despite accusations that this government is abusing some of its citizens, a shift in the balance of civic and political power is underway. The key to its continuation is the newly assertive Supreme Court behind me, for it is inspiring many Pakistanis to press for their rights. Directly opposite the court, petitioners from across the country now picket the building, calling for justice. Nasreen Iqbal has spent weeks camped outside. She says she lost her home and 12 acres to expropriation by local officials. The court has already given her some protection, but she's hoping for more.
I came here to appeal to the Chief Justice of Pakistan to help me again. I want the people who occupied my house to be removed. The police have arrested 2 suspects on the orders of the Supreme Court. Now I want the police to arrest the other 11.
That Pakistanis from all walks of life are now demanding the full implementation of the law is, attorneys say, both a new development and a further shot across the government's bow. Iftikhar Gilani is a Supreme Court advocate who took part in the demonstrations and court challenges supporting the Chief Justice. People feel newly empowered, he says, and expect the Supreme Court to insist on accountability from authorities and from President Musharraf on the election front as well.
You know, one of his statements was, if somebody likes it or does not like it, I'm going to be the president of this country for the next 5 years. This is a statement. I heard it myself. Literally, I'm not joking. That if somebody likes it or does not like it, I am going to be the president for the next 5 years. No, sorry. The lawyers said no. The civil society said no. And our instrument of implementation of our wishes today is Supreme Court of Pakistan.
If the new self-confidence of Pakistan's courts and civil society is creating headaches for President Musharraf, it could do the same for exiled civilian politicians, former Prime Ministers Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif, who are now planning to return. Jahangir says they're in for a surprise.
I, in fact, said to both of them that Pakistan has changed. When you come back, it's not the same Pakistan. And I'm sure they realize, they watch television where they are. It's not the same, and people are going to ask questions. It's not going to be the dictate of leadership alone. People will expect more consultation.
Under military rule, the people of Pakistan still lack normal political channels to work their will. But the flourishing of artistic, journalistic, and judicial activism during the Musharraf era has created a platform on which they can build.
Now a literary birthday, 50 years for On the Road. Jeffrey Brown reports.
A most unusual literary document is traveling the country this year. The 120-foot scroll on which Jack Kerouac typed over 20 days in April 1951, the original version of On the Road, his semi-autobiographical novel that would become a seminal marker of cultural change in the 1950s and 60s. Kerouac was born in Lowell, Massachusetts, to French-Canadian parents. His first language was French. He studied at Columbia on a football scholarship and began writing seriously there before leaving school. On the Road recounts his travels across America by thumb, car, and bus in the years 1947 to 1950, often with Neil Cassidy, the prototype slang-talking hipster who became a model for youthful rebellion through the 1960s and beyond. Other Kerouac friends, including poet Allen Ginsberg and writer William Burroughs, would themselves become famous as part of the so-called Beat Generation. The book's portrait of fast-living, unconventional youth continues to connect with many young people today.
When I was reading his On the Road, it was about living in the moment and just taking off and not knowing what was going to happen, but having faith that it was going to work out and you were just going to do whatever you wanted. You know, I mean, how perfect is that?
When On the Road was first published in 1957, editors imposed a number of changes to the text. Now the original scroll version has been released for the first time. It and new research could inspire some rethinking about Kerouac the writer, says co-editor Penny Vlagopoulos.
People think that he just sort of sat down and wrote books without much thought, and in fact, one of the big reasons for our project is to dispel the myth that he wrote it in 3 weeks. And in fact, it's a book that he was thinking about and writing in various versions for years.
Jack Kerouac wrote dozens of books in his lifetime, but died young in 1969 at age 47. On the Road continues to sell some 100,000 copies every year. Some reflections on Jack Kerouac and On the Road from Audrey Springer, a sociologist and documentarian. She develops artistic, cultural, and educational programming at the Denver Public Library and was co-creator of the Kerouac events in Denver last winter. Well, just to get right to it, what do you think explains the continuing popularity of this book?
I think the continuing popularity of the book stems from the fact that Jack Kerouac was brave enough to defy social convention and comfort to do quite a radical thing, which was to simply be in the world and write about it. He was a deeply, deeply disciplined writer who was committed to documenting America every day as it was lived by people, and I think that he really captured the ways that people live and spoke. And that's what he was committed to as an artist, trying to develop a new way of American writing which would be evocative of how people actually lived, whether or not it followed the rules of grammar or literary convention.
And if you can take us back to the time when he wrote it, or at least when it was first published, did it have that kind of impact right away?
It definitely did. Kerouac wrote on the road in the 1940s, and it took, almost a decade before it was published. And then when it was published in the late 1950s, 50 years ago this September, it gave a voice to an entire generation of artists and painters and poets who were developing a new idiom of American art that was much akin to African-American jazz and the spirit of cooperation, collaboration, improvisation. And Kerouac gave voice to that through this novel On the Road and his commitment to living as an American artist.
Certainly a lot has been made of his chronicling of a side of America at that time that was not often portrayed, and certainly the sex and the drugs at that time was certainly not portrayed very often in popular culture.
And I don't even know if it was just sex and drugs, but a kind of intimacy, a kind of spirituality. Kerouac was extremely talented at capturing the lives of people who were quite different from himself. He himself was somewhat of an outsider.